True stories revealed. Uncovering fascinating true stories from around the world, one tale at a time.
The House of Dreams. Sydney hums with excitement. A competition to design a world-class performing arts center has been announced, igniting the imaginations of over 200 architects from around the world. Each one submits a vision, dreams sketched in ink, ambitions shaped in lines and angles. Among them is Jørn Utzon, a relatively unknown Danish architect. His submission, Sketchmer 218, is unlike anything ever seen before. White sails cresting over Sydney Harbor, a structure that doesn't merely sit on the landscape but belongs to it, as if it had always been there, waiting to be discovered. But when the judges sift through the designs, Utzon's dream never even makes the shortlist. Impractical, impossible, a waste of time. His vision is discarded, lost in the pile of forgotten dreams, the kind of pile where great ideas go to die. And that should have been the end. But fate has other plans. The second chance. Eero Saarinen arrives late. A world-renowned American architect, he's supposed to review only the final contenders, the ones deemed worthy of shaping Sydney's skyline. But something unsettles him. The choices feel safe, expected, tamed. Something is missing. Where are the rejections, he asks. The room shifts. The other judges exchange uneasy glances. What's the point, someone mutters. They were discarded for a reason. But Saarinen insists. He flips through the discarded pile, one forgotten design after another, until he stops. The sails, they rise from the page like something from a dream, like something impossible, yet inevitable. His breath catches. This one, he says, silence. Then murmurs of disapproval. It's been rejected, they argue. It won't stand. It can't be built. But Saarinen doesn't back down. He argues, he persuades, he fights for a vision only one man had dared to dream. And against all odds, Jørn Utzon's design, the one left for dead, is pulled back into the light. But this is only the beginning. The battle to build, the Opera House will not rise easily. It will be built not just with concrete and steel, but with ambition, defiance, and sacrifice. It will face a war between visionaries and bureaucrats, between art and politics, between those who dream of the impossible and those who fear it. At times, it will seem like the dream will collapse under its own weight, and for a time, it almost does. The world will celebrate the Sydney Opera House as a masterpiece, but few will ever know how close it came to never existing at all. The house that almost wasn't, a nation's dream. The world was shifting, and Australia stood at a crossroads. The post-war boom had transformed its cities, but something was missing. A cultural beacon, a statement to the world that it belonged among the greats. The New South Wales government made a bold move. An international competition to design an opera house unlike any other. 100 architects would come, then 100 more. And when the deadline closed, 233 designs lay before the judges, each a promise of the future, sketched in ink and ambition. But no one knew that what they were about to approve would push the limits of engineering, challenge the will of governments, and nearly collapse under the weight of its own vision. The sketch that should have been forgotten. The judges sifted through submissions, searching for a masterpiece. Some designs were grand, others were elegant, many were practical. But one, the most daring of them all, wasn't even considered. It arrived late, tucked among the discarded entries, tossed onto the rejection pile without a second thought. Its creator? A relatively unknown Danish architect named Jørn Utzon. His design was unlike anything seen before. White sails cresting over the harbor, light as clouds, weightless as poetry. It wasn't a building, it was a vision, and it was impossible. Too radical, too impractical, too much, and that should have been the end of it. 3. The man who saw what others couldn't. But fate has a way of intervening. Eero Saarinen, a world-renowned architect, arrived late to the judging. He was only supposed to review the finalists. But something gnawed at him. He turned to the rejected pile. The other judges hesitated. What was the point? They had already dismissed those designs, but Saarinen insisted. He flipped through page after page of discarded ideas until he saw it. The sails. It looked like it belonged to another world, and yet it was exactly what this world needed. The room fell silent. "This one," he said. The resistance was immediate. "It's impractical. It can't be built. It will fail." But Saarinen refused to back down. He saw what no one else could, and because of him, Utzon's dream was pulled from the ashes and given a second chance. A war against gravity, politics, and time. Winning the competition was just the beginning. What followed was a battle. A war fought not with weapons, but with concrete steel and sheer willpower. From the start, the design defied logic. Engineers shook their heads. The sails couldn't stand. The materials didn't exist. It was supposed to take 4 years to build. It took 14. Budgets spiraled out of control. Governments changed. Doubt grew. And then, betrayal. The very people who had once celebrated Utzon turned against him. They cut his funding, questioned his leadership, and in the end, forced him out. The architect who had dreamed of the opera house would never see it finished. The House of Betrayal, 1959, construction begins. From the start, it is a war against gravity, time, and doubt. The design is impossible. Each sail must fit together perfectly, yet no known technology can build them. Costs explode, deadlines are ignored, and engineers struggle to turn vision into reality. The dream is slipping. Finances drain faster than anyone imagined. At first, the public is enthralled, then impatient, then furious. Politicians, once its champions, now scoff at the spiraling costs. They whisper behind closed doors, calling it a fantasy house, searching for an exit strategy. But the real danger isn't physics, it's politics. Jørn Utzon is relentless. He sacrifices everything, his time, his health, his reputation, to bring the opera house to life. He believes. But belief isn't enough when enemies lurk within his own team, waiting for the moment to strike. And then, betrayal. A letter arrives. His funding is cut, his authority questioned. The very people who once celebrated him push him out. Utzon walks away, leaving behind the unfinished bones of his greatest creation. He will never return. The price of a dream, betrayed, humiliated, erased. Jørn Utzon, the man who had given Sydney its most daring vision, was cast aside, forced out, unpaid, unwelcome. He left Australia with a vow: he would never return. But his exile did not save the project from disaster. Without him, chaos took hold. Engineers, desperate to salvage what remained, simplified his designs, details, and reshaped the interiors. Cost-cutting decisions threatened the very foundation of the opera house, nearly compromising the entire structure. Meanwhile, costs exploded. What began as a $7 million project spiraled to $102 million, 14 times the budget. The media ripped it apart, a failure, a scandal, a national disgrace. If the project collapsed, it wouldn't just be a financial catastrophe, it would shatter Australia's global reputation. And then, against all odds, against every betrayal, despite the political bloodshed, the impossible happened. The structure stood, a monument to vision and sacrifice, completed in 1973. But the man who birthed it, who fought for it, was not there to see it. The Sydney Opera House was finished, but it would forever be stained with the cost of betrayal. The Ghost of a Dream, 1973. 14 years of blood, sweat, and whispered betrayals. At last, the Sydney Opera House stood complete, an impossible structure, a triumph pulled from the edge of disaster. Before a crowd of thousands, Queen Elizabeth II declared it a masterpiece. Applause thundered. The world had watched, waiting for it to crumble. Instead, it soared. And yet, Jørn Utzon was nowhere to be seen. The unveiling of his vision, the celebration of his genius, it all happened without him. No mention, no honor. The sails gleamed beneath the sun, the curves of his creation etched into history, yet Utzon's eyes would never see it. His hands, which had once shaped its destiny, had been erased. But history has a way of correcting its mistakes. The Resurrection, a legacy reclaimed. Years passed. The Sydney Opera House, once ridiculed, once nearly abandoned, had become immortal. No longer just a building, it was a symbol of Australia's soul, a beacon of art, defiance, and limitless human ingenuity. The world had doubted it, yet it stood. And so did Jørn Utzon's legacy. For decades, his name had been whispered in the shadows of its history, but the truth could not be buried forever. Time had a way of righting its wrongs. Then, in 2003, the world finally made amends. Jørn Utzon, now an old man, his hair silver, his hands worn, received the Pritzker Prize, architecture's highest honor. The recognition he had been denied for so long was finally his, and with it, something even greater. A letter arrived. Not from politicians, not from bureaucrats, but from the Sydney Opera House itself. An invitation, not to erase the past, but to honor the man who had shaped the future. Though he could no longer travel, his son, Jørn Utzon, walked through the doors his father never could, standing in his place. And as he stood inside the grand halls, gazing up at the soaring ceilings, he knew his father's spirit was here. Jørn Utzon's name was no longer a ghost in its history. It was woven into its walls, whispered in its sails, eternal in its presence. The opera house, his opera house, was finally his again. And though he never returned, he no longer had to, because the world had spoken and it had said his name with pride. In the end, the dream had come home. The future awaits. As we step into 2025 and beyond, the Sydney Opera House stands not just as a masterpiece of the past, but as a beacon of the future. Its walls, once shaped by controversy, now pulse with innovation. Sustainability initiatives redefining architecture, digital expansions bringing performances to every corner of the globe, and artists breathing new life into its sacred halls. Its story isn't over. It's only just beginning. And perhaps, somewhere in the world, in a small studio or a quiet cafe, another visionary sits before a blank page, sketching an impossible dream, one that the world will call impractical, unbuildable, absurd. But history has taught us something. No great masterpiece comes without a fight.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you enjoyed the video, and we can't wait to see you again in the next one. If you found this content inspiring, please like and subscribe to stay updated with our latest releases. Your support means the world to us. See you soon!